A moment of truth at the African Union Summit. The Grand Hall of the African Union Summit was steeped in a heavy silence, not one of calm but the kind that signals an impending storm. African leaders, men and women of immense power, sat at their polished desks, each with the vibrant flags of their nations standing proudly behind them. Cameras, positioned at every angle, captured the scene for a global audience. The world was watching, waiting. This summit was meant to focus on progress, trade, and unity. At least that was the official agenda. But beneath the surface, a far weightier matter loomed. The recent events in Kenya had cast a dark shadow over the gathering. Young protesters, unarmed and peaceful, had been shot and killed in the streets. They were students, jobless youth, ordinary citizens who had dared to demand a better future. Their cries for change were met not with dialogue, but with bullets. The silence of many African leaders on this tragedy spoke volumes. Some were cautious, fearing diplomatic fallout. Others stayed quiet to avoid crossing Kenya's President William Ruto. But one voice refused to remain silent. That voice belonged to Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the young leader of Burkina Faso. Just 36, Traoré stood out among his peers, not only for his age but for his fearless demeanor. Clad in his military uniform, he carried himself with a quiet pride and spoke with unflinching directness. When the moderator called his name, all eyes turned to him and the cameras followed. Traoré rose deliberately, strode to the podium and surveyed the room. He paused, locking eyes with each leader in turn, letting the weight of the moment settle. Then he spoke. "I come here today not just as a president," he began, "but as a young African. Like millions across our continent, I am weary of leaders who turn a blind eye to the cries of their people." A faint murmur rippled through the crowd. Some leaders shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Traoré pressed on. In Kenya, young people marched peacefully. They harmed no one. They sought only answers, yet they were met with death. And what has the African Union said in response? He paused, his gaze piercing. Nothing. The room grew taut with tension. His voice, though measured, carried the weight of truth. "We claim to champion democracy, but what kind of democracy slaughters its youth for asking questions? If we remain silent, we are complicit in this crime." Cameras zoomed in, capturing the unease on some leaders' faces. A few avoided eye contact, while others leaned back, as if distancing themselves from the words. Traoré's resolve did not waver. "I demand a full, transparent, and international investigation into the violence in Kenya," he declared. "We must uncover who gave the order to shoot, who pulled the trigger, and why our youth are treated as enemies in their own land." The hall fell utterly still. If any president is responsible, whether it is Ruto or anyone else, they must face accountability. We are not here to shield one another. We are here to protect our people. In that moment, the atmosphere shifted. The silence that had once stifled the room gave way to an electric charge. Traoré had done the unthinkable. He had called out a fellow leader, not for personal gain but for justice. The reaction was immediate. Across Africa, television screens and social media platforms buzzed with activity. Hashtags like #JusticeForKenyanYouth and #TraorSpeakstrith trended as people shared clips of his speech. "Finally, someone isn't afraid," they said in villages, cities, and online forums. Traoré's words were concise but piercing, each sentence a blow against the status quo. When he finished, he gave the room one last steady look, nodded, and returned to his seat. The silence that followed was different now, not one of anticipation but of shock, as if a long-buried truth had been unearthed. For the youth of Africa, this was a defining moment. From urban street corners to rural homes, people watched, transfixed. They saw a leader who challenged the old guard, who refused to let the blood of their peers stain the streets without consequence. Traoré was already a hero to many for his stance against foreign influence and his fight for Burkina Faso's sovereignty. But now he had become a voice for all African youth, for Nigeria, Senegal, Uganda, Ghana, South Africa, and especially Kenya, where the cries of the silence still echoed. Yet another figure had been watching closely from across the room, Cyril Ramaphosa, the president of South Africa. As Traore took his seat, the hall remained gripped by tension. The moderator, visibly rattled, shuffled papers and attempted to move the agenda forward. But then, unexpectedly, Ramaphosa stood. South Africa's leader, a towering figure on the continent, rose with calm authority. He adjusted his suit, buttoned his jacket, and walked to the podium without a word. The room turned to him, whispers circulating. This was unscheduled, unscripted. Ramaphosa reached the microphone, paused, and spoke in a voice that was steady and resonant. "I was not scheduled to speak," he began, "but after hearing President Traore, I cannot remain silent." The silence deepened, but it was no longer awkward. It was attentive, hanging on his every word. "I commend President Traore for his courage," Ramaphosa continued. "He spoke with truth and heart, and he spoke for millions of young Africans watching us now. What happened in Kenya cannot be ignored. Unarmed youth, using only their voices, were killed. That is not democracy, it is a tragedy." Some leaders looked away, the weight of his words settling heavily. "We cannot be leaders who turn away from injustice," Ramaphosa said. "If our people bleed in the streets and we stay silent, we are not leaders, we are cowards." His tone was not accusatory, but each word carried undeniable force. South Africa supports the call for an independent investigation into the events in Kenya. If state power was used to silence peaceful voices, those responsible must face consequences, no matter who they are. The room froze. South Africa was no minor player, it was a continental powerhouse. Ramaphosa's alignment with Traore elevated the issue beyond a single voice of dissent. It was now a movement. He stepped back briefly, then leaned forward again. "This is not about attacking a fellow leader," he said, glancing toward the Kenyan delegation. "President Ruto, if you believe your hands are clean, you should welcome this investigation. The people deserve the truth." Quiet gasps spread through the hall. It was a bold but measured challenge, delivered with the precision of a seasoned statesman. Ramaphosa concluded, "The African Union cannot remain a club of silence. We must be a voice for the people, not just for ourselves. The youth of Africa are watching, and I want them to know, we hear you, we see you, and we will not be silent." As he returned to his seat, the room remained stunned. A few leaders clapped softly, but most sat in silence, processing the magnitude of what had just occurred. Inside the hall, the continent erupted. Social media platforms exploded with clips of Ramaphosa's speech, alongside Traore's. Hashtags like #TraoreRamaphosa, #Justice for Kenyan Youth, and #AReformNow trended across the globe. In South Africa, even Ramaphosa's critics praised his stand. In Kenya, young people, though still grieving, felt a glimmer of hope. For many, this was more than a moment, it was the spark of a new Africa. The summit's tone had irrevocably changed. African Union gatherings were typically marked by cautious diplomacy, polite exchanges, and carefully worded statements. But Traore and Ramaphosa had shattered that mold. Their speeches, one raw with passion, the other measured with authority, had exposed the cracks in the system. Delegates whispered nervously, some visibly shaken. The high table, African Union Commission members huddled, murmuring about how to respond. No playbook existed for this. Kenyan delegation, led by President Ruto, remained stoic. Ruto sat forward, his expression unreadable, though his mind was undoubtedly racing. He had been called out twice on a global stage, not with hostility but with a demand for accountability. Across the hall, other leaders grappled with the moment's implications. The West African bloc exchanged glances, their representative from Senegal shaking his head. The Central African group seemed paralyzed, while the East African corner, particularly Kenya's delegation, sat rigid. In the private lounge during the break, the usual light-hearted chatter was absent. Leaders clustered in hushed conversations. "Did you expect Ramaphosa to go that far?" one asked. "It changes everything," another replied. "If South Africa is behind this, we can't ignore it." Some defended Ruto, urging caution. We don't have all the facts. But others countered, then let's find them. That's what Traore and Ramaphosa are asking for. As the summit continued, a motion began to take shape. Behind closed doors, a proposal was drafted for a special AU fact-finding committee to investigate state violence and protest rights. Though it avoided naming Kenya explicitly, its origins were clear. The ripple effect of Traore and Ramaphosa's courage was undeniable. Some leaders hoped the issue would fade, longing for the comfort of the status quo. But others knew that normal was no longer sustainable. The African Union had witnessed something extraordinary, not diplomacy but conviction. As leaders left the hall that evening, their minds were not on trade or security, but on a deeper question: what would they say if their own people rose up? And how would they face the next Traore or Ramaphosa, who might one day look them in the eye and demand the truth? The silence had been broken, and Africa would never be the same.
Thank you for standing with us, for standing with the truth, and for standing with President Ibrahim Traoré. In these trying times, your voice is powerful. Don't just watch, be part of the movement. Subscribe to stay updated, share to awaken others, and head to the comment section. Tell us how you feel, what you believe, and what Africa means to you. Together we are louder, together we are stronger. This is Young